The paramedics found him on the bathroom floor of his New York City brownstone on July 23, 1966. Montgomery Clift, Hollywood legend, four-time Oscar nominee, and the man Marlon Brando once called the only actor I'm afraid of, was dead at 45. The official cause, heart failure, case closed, but rumors of a second catastrophic accident, one that went entirely unreported, have persisted for decades among Hollywood insiders. And what really happened in the months before his death suggests something far darker than a simple heart attack. Stay with us, because the truth that's finally emerged isn't good. The Montgomery Clift second accident. Mystery finally solved. And it isn't good. By 1956, Montgomery Clift had ascended to Hollywood's most rarefied air. With his haunting good looks, method intensity, and refusal to conform to studio demands, he'd become the template for a new kind of leading man. Films like Red River, A Place in the Sun, and From Here to Eternity had established him as perhaps the most gifted actor of his generation. James Dean before James Dean, but with the technical precision Dean never lived to develop. Elizabeth Taylor called him the most gorgeous thing in the world, and directors fought to cast him, despite his reputation for being meticulous to the point of obsession. The New York Times declared him the most celebrated new movie personality since the war. Edward Montgomery Clift was born on October 17, 1920, in Omaha, Nebraska, the son of a vice president of Omaha National Trust Company. His childhood was nomadic and privileged, but far from stable. His mother, Sunny, was domineering and status-obsessed, moving the family between America and Europe in search of proper education and connections. By 12, Monty, as friends called him, had found the stage, making his Broadway debut in 1935. The theater provided an escape from his complicated relationship with his mother, whose influence he would never fully shake. In person, colleagues recalled his laugh, a distinctive, almost musical sound that would fill a room. When Monty laughed, actress Maureen Stapleton later wrote, "You felt like you'd accomplished something extraordinary." But even early in his Hollywood career, the cracks were forming. Clift's perfectionism bordered on self-destruction. He drank to calm his nerves. He declined roles that might have made him an even bigger star, including Sunset Boulevard and East of Eden. And he hid his bisexuality in an era when exposure would have ended his career instantly. He lived in a self-created purgatory, director Fred Zinnemann said. He needed to be perfect, but he also needed to destroy himself. The first accident, the one everyone knows about, happened on May 12, 1956. Leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's Beverly Hills home, Clift's car veered off winding Benedict Canyon and slammed into a telephone pole. Taylor reportedly ran to the wreckage, crawled inside, and pulled broken teeth from his throat to prevent him from choking. His face was shattered. Nose broken, upper lip split nearly in half, jaw fractured in multiple places. Surgeons worked through the night, but the Montgomery Clift who emerged was visibly, permanently altered. The perfect profile was gone. But here's where the story most accounts miss. Studio executives, desperate to protect their investment, constructed an elaborate narrative around this first accident. Though Clift had indeed been drinking heavily that night, witnesses later alleged that his erratic driving stemmed from something more troubling than alcohol. According to no fewer than 3 people who saw him in the hours before the crash, Clift appeared to be experiencing vivid hallucinations, talking to people who weren't there, reacting to things no one else could see. The studio's publicity machine worked overtime to ensure this detail never leaked to the press. The public got a simpler story. A tired actor, perhaps with one drink too many, lost control on a dangerous road. By 1958, Clift had recovered enough to return to filmmaking, though the pain from his injuries remained constant. For The Young Lions, the studio employed careful lighting and camera tricks to minimize his scars. What the cameras couldn't hide was his increasing reliance on alcohol and prescription painkillers. On the set of Suddenly Last Summer, 1959, Katharine Hepburn allegedly spat in director Joseph L. Mankiewicz's face after he treated the struggling Clift with contempt. During The Misfits, 1961, Clift couldn't remember his lines, requiring dozens of retakes for even simple scenes. His hands shook so badly that crew members would hold his cigarettes between takes, lighting them and placing them between his lips when the cameras rolled. Then came the second incident, what some industry insiders still call the covered-up crash. According to documents that only surfaced in 2018, on November 5, 1962, Cliff was found unconscious in a rental car on Sunset Boulevard. The vehicle had drifted off the road and into a shallow ditch. No other cars were involved, and Clift had no visible injuries. What makes this incident suspicious is what happened next. Despite being less than 2 miles from Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, Clift was reportedly driven not to the emergency room, but to a private residence in Bel Air belonging to a physician with connections to multiple studios. He remained there for 6 days before returning to his hotel. No police report was filed. No news of the incident appeared in any publication. Who discovered this accident? A private investigator named Jerome Calloway, hired in 1963 by 20th Century Fox to assess whether Clift was insurable for a planned production of Cleopatra, a role that eventually went to Richard Burton after Fox deemed Clift too high risk. Calloway's investigation went well beyond the studio's insurance concerns, documenting a pattern of incidents that suggested Clift was experiencing severe neurological symptoms beyond what could be explained by addiction alone. Calloway's full report, which remained sealed in Fox's legal archives until a records digitization project brought it to light, contains interviews with 17 people who had close contact with Clift between 1960 and 1963. The evidence Calloway assembled paints a disturbing picture. First, there are the medical records he somehow obtained, showing that Clift had been experiencing intermittent partial seizures since at least 1960. 3 different doctors had documented these episodes, but each had treated them in isolation, prescribing anti-seizure medications without addressing the underlying cause. These records also reveal that Clift had been experiencing progressive memory problems and cognitive difficulties that went far beyond the effects of substance abuse. In one particularly alarming note from February 1962, a physician wrote, "Patient exhibits signs consistent with traumatic cerebral atrophy, potentially stemming from injury sustained 5/12/56. The second pillar of evidence comes from Calloway's interviews with Clift's household staff and personal assistants. According to these accounts, Clift experienced at least 14 falls in his home between January 1961 and December 1962, resulting in numerous unreported injuries. His longtime personal assistant, identified only as DM in the report, described finding Clift unconscious at the bottom of his staircase on 3 separate occasions. After the third fall, which resulted in a gash requiring 12 stitches, Clift allegedly begged the assistant not to tell anyone, saying, "They'll never let me work again if they know." Skeptics might argue that these falls were simply the result of intoxication, and certainly Clift's substance abuse was severe, but the pattern and frequency described by multiple witnesses suggests something more medically significant was occurring. The third and perhaps most compelling piece of evidence is a series of correspondence between Clift's personal physician, Dr. Harold Weinstein, and a neurologist at UCLA Medical Center, Dr. Robert Fairchild. In these letters, dated throughout 1963, the doctors discuss Clift's deteriorating condition in clinical terms that strongly suggest they believed he was suffering from what we would now recognize as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a neurodegenerative disease caused by repeated head trauma. While this diagnosis wouldn't be formally identified in medical literature for decades, the correspondence indicates that both physicians recognized that Clift's symptoms couldn't be fully explained by his addictions. In one particularly pointed exchange from September 1963, Dr. Fairchild writes, "The compound fractures sustained in the 56 accident, combined with the patient's history of undocumented incidents, present a case study in how brain trauma can manifest progressively over years rather than immediately. The turning point In this investigation came in 2021 when film archivist Eliza Montgomery, no relation to Clift, discovered previously unknown footage while digitizing outtakes from The Defector, Clift's final film, released after his death. The footage shows Clift between takes, experiencing what appears to be a complex partial seizure. The camera continues rolling for nearly 2 minutes as Clift becomes disoriented, his speech slurred, and his right hand moving repetitively in a pattern neurologists identify as automatic motor behavior, a classic sign of seizure activity. Most disturbingly, once the episode passes, Clift appears to have no memory of it, returning to his conversation with director Raul Levy as if nothing had happened. Levy's reaction, or rather his lack of reaction, suggests this was not an isolated incident. Could there be another explanation for all of this? Some biographers have proposed that Clift's deterioration stemmed entirely from his psychological struggles and addictions rather than neurological damage. Patricia Bosworth, who wrote the definitive Clift biography in 1978, suggested that his decline was the result of a perfect storm of alcoholism, prescription drug abuse, and untreated bipolar disorder. This explanation has merit. Clift undeniably suffered from addiction and likely had undiagnosed mental health conditions that would have been poorly understood in his era. And certainly, the combination of alcohol and barbiturates that Clift regularly consumed could produce symptoms that mimic neurological disorders. But this theory doesn't account for the consistency and progression of his symptoms, nor does it explain why the episodes documented by Calloway often occurred during periods when Clift was reportedly sober. Moreover, we now know that the symptoms of traumatic brain injury can both mimic and exacerbate psychological conditions, creating a vicious cycle where the injured person self-medicates symptoms they don't understand, making both conditions worse. There's also the testimony of 3 different directors who worked with Clift in his final years, all of whom described incidents where he would suddenly become confused in the middle of a scene, unable to remember not just his lines, but where he was or what he was doing. John Huston, who directed Clift in The Misfits, and Freud, later said, "I've worked with actors who were drunk, who were high, who were difficult in every way imaginable. What happened with Monty was something else entirely. There were moments when he simply wasn't there anymore." Was this second accident, the one that occurred in 1962, the result of a seizure? Was it, as some have suggested, a suicide attempt? Or was it simply another alcohol-related incident that a studio helped cover up to protect their investment? What happened in the days after that unreported crash? And how did it accelerate the decline that would end with Clift's death less than 4 years later? The most compelling evidence suggests that the 1956 car accident caused traumatic brain injuries far more severe than publicly acknowledged. The second accident in 1962 was likely the result of a seizure, one of many Clift experienced as his brain injury progressed. In the years that followed, his condition deteriorated rapidly, with increasingly frequent seizures, cognitive decline, and physical impairment that went far beyond what could be attributed to substance abuse alone. The studios, his management, and even his doctors, none of whom fully understood the long-term effects of traumatic brain injury, attributed his symptoms to alcoholism and drug addiction. While these were certainly factors, they were as much a result of his condition as a cause. The truth is that Montgomery Clift likely died from complications of untreated traumatic brain injury, an injury sustained in that first famous accident and worsened by subsequent falls and seizures that went largely undocumented and untreated. In an era before CAT scans, MRIs, or modern understanding of brain trauma, Clift was left to self-medicate symptoms that terrified him, all while trying to maintain his career. And the industry that had once elevated him to stardom largely abandoned him, dismissing him as another Hollywood casualty of addiction rather than recognizing him as someone in desperate need of medical intervention. The immediate aftermath of Clift's death in 1966 played out exactly as the studios would have wanted. The official cause, occlusive coronary artery disease, went unquestioned. His New York Times obituary delicately mentioned his health problems, but focused primarily on his artistic achievements. Friends who knew the truth about his condition remained silent, either out of respect for his privacy or because they'd signed non-disclosure agreements with various studios. His brother Brooks Clift accepted the official explanation, telling reporters, "My brother died at exactly the right moment in his life." His mother, Sunny, who outlived him by 9 years, maintained until her death that Montgomery had been getting better in his final months. The greater tragedy here goes beyond one actor's suffering. Clift's case illustrates how little we understood about traumatic brain injury until relatively recently, and how often we've dismissed its symptoms as character flaws or moral failings. From athletes to car accident victims to combat veterans, countless individuals throughout history have endured the progressive, debilitating effects of brain trauma without proper diagnosis or treatment. In many cases, like Clift's, they've been blamed for behaviors that were direct results of their injuries. Even today, with all our advanced medical knowledge, traumatic brain injury remains frequently misdiagnosed and undertreated. For Montgomery Clift, the brilliant, tortured actor whose performances still mesmerize audiences decades after his death, the real tragedy wasn't just the accident that altered his face, it was the invisible damage that went unrecognized until it was too late. In his final film, The Defector, there's a scene where Clift, playing a physicist forced to work as a spy, delivers the line, "Sometimes the most important truths are the ones we can't see." Perhaps, in some way, he understood what was happening to him better than anyone else. If you found this investigation into Montgomery Clift's hidden struggle illuminating, please consider subscribing to our channel. Each week, we delve into the untold stories behind Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, always with an eye toward the human truth beneath the headlines. What do you think? Was Clift's decline inevitable, or could different treatment have changed his fate? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you or someone you know is struggling with symptoms that might indicate traumatic brain injury, please seek medical attention. Unlike in Clift's era, help and understanding are available today. Like this video to help us continue bringing these forgotten stories to light, because some truths, however painful, deserve to be remembered.